If you think grocery shopping hasn't changed in months, you're missing the bigger picture. It's not just rising prices. You're paying more for less, smaller packages, shifting quality, and familiar items slowly disappearing. In this video, you'll see 12 grocery items to buy before April 1st, 2026. They won't vanish overnight, but waiting could mean paying more or losing good options. One item, number 7, is familiar yet changing faster than anything else, and most notice only after the price jumps. Watch till the end. This is about more than shopping. It's about whether you're still in control of your money or losing it without realizing. Just last week, that same cut of beef you usually buy might have cost around $12. Now, only a week later, you could be looking at $14 or even higher for exactly the same thing. The real concern isn't simply that prices are going up, it's that you slowly start getting used to not buying it at all. In a short span of time, beef prices have jumped anywhere between 5% and 14%, making it one of the fastest growing categories in terms of cost. But if you brush this off as just another routine price change, you're missing what's actually happening. With beef, the shift doesn't begin with empty shelves. It begins with your own choices. The reasons behind it are straightforward. Livestock expenses are climbing, fuel costs are increasing, and transportation is getting more expensive. However, there's one key detail that often goes unnoticed. Feed alone makes up over 60% of the total cost of raising cattle. So when the prices of corn and soybeans rise, it becomes nearly impossible for beef to remain affordable. Here's something most people aren't aware of. Many cattle are now being processed earlier than usual. This isn't due to a shortage, but because keeping them longer actually leads to financial losses. You don't directly see those added costs, but you end up covering them every time you shop. And that's where the chain reaction starts to unfold. As beef gets pricier, people don't stop eating meat. They simply switch to more affordable options like chicken. When millions of shoppers make that same decision, the demand for those alternatives increases, pushing their prices up as well. What begins with one product quickly spreads throughout the entire food system. The unsettling part is that you may not even notice it happening. By the time it becomes obvious, you've already adjusted your habits without realizing it. You still visit the grocery store each week, walk past the meat section, and see the same cuts you used to buy. But now you pick one up, glance at the price, and quietly put it back. Not because it's unavailable and not because supply is low, but because a small question starts forming in your mind. Is it really worth it? Once that thought repeats itself a few times, your behavior has already started to shift. Beef isn't the first thing to disappear. What fades first is your sense of choice. And when you find yourself skipping it again and again, the system has already changed, without anyone needing to point it out. Chances are, you're not the only one leaving beef out of your cart lately. Think about it. When was the last time you picked up meat, hesitated, and put it back? More and more people are adjusting, not by eating less, but by changing when and how they buy. Number 11, coffee. If you woke up tomorrow and didn't have your usual coffee, would you actually feel fine? Not just mentally, but physically, because your body has already gotten used to it. That's when it hits you that coffee isn't just another beverage. It's a deeply ingrained habit that's not easy to replace. Prices for coffee have been climbing noticeably, with increases of 15% to 25% in some areas recently. What's surprising, though, is that demand hasn't really gone down. Recent agricultural reports show that global coffee production is being impacted by extreme weather, extended droughts in Brazil, unusually heavy rainfall in Colombia, and broader climate disruptions across key growing regions that are cutting yields significantly. On top of that, rising transportation costs and ongoing supply chain issues are adding even more pressure. But there's one important factor most people don't think about. Coffee trees need about 3 to 5 years before they start producing consistent yields. So when supply drops, it's not something that can bounce back quickly. This isn't a short-term issue that will fix itself in a few months. You may not notice these changes directly, but you're paying for them every single day, and that likely won't stop, even if prices keep climbing. One person shared that they didn't realize how much prices had gone up until the end of the month when they reviewed their expenses. They found that their coffee spending had actually surpassed what they were spending on breakfast. And that's when the system really starts to shift. Even as coffee prices rise, people don't cut back. It's one of the rare products where higher prices don't push people away. In fact, it makes them even less willing to give it up. As long as demand stays strong, there's very little incentive for prices to drop. When coffee becomes more expensive, cafes have no choice but to raise their prices too. And once that happens, your daily cup isn't as affordable as it used to be. Over time, you start to notice something subtle. Your overall cost of living is creeping up because of something that seems small and insignificant. The unsettling part is that you won't notice it immediately. By the time it becomes obvious, you've already adjusted to paying the higher price. And once that shift happens, the old lower prices rarely return. On the surface, nothing really changes. Your mornings look the same. You still make your coffee and drink it like always. Everything feels normal. But at the end of the month, when you take a closer look at your spending, the difference becomes clear. You're paying more just to maintain the same routine. As prices continue to rise, some people start searching for alternatives, switching to tea, opting for instant coffee, or even watering it down to make it last longer. But in reality, very few people quit coffee altogether. Instead, they find ways to adapt so they can keep the habit going. This isn't something that disappears from your life. It's something that stays with you, quietly taking a little more of your money every single day. And just when you think you're still in control, it might actually be the habit controlling you. So ask yourself, do you really know how much you're spending on coffee each month? Number 10. Milk and butter. Have you ever noticed that your grocery basket looks exactly the same as last week, yet somehow the total ends up higher? It's not because you added more items. It's because certain products are quietly increasing in price in ways that are easy to miss. Milk and butter are two of the biggest examples of this. Unlike beef, their prices aren't jumping dramatically, but they're rising in a much more subtle and arguably more concerning way. The increase is gradual, steady, and doesn't seem to stop. In some regions, prices have gone up by about 4% to 8% recently, and there's no clear sign that this trend is slowing down. The reasons come from underlying costs that most people never see. Expenses tied to livestock are increasing, feed is becoming more expensive, cold storage costs are climbing, and electricity, one of the biggest factors, is getting pricier. The very systems that keep milk and butter fresh are now costing more to operate. Milk, in particular, is one of those products that has to stay refrigerated constantly, from the moment it leaves the farm all the way until it reaches your fridge at home. So even a small rise in energy costs can ripple through the entire supply chain. You don't see that process happening, but you're paying for it every time you shop. And the reality is, you'll keep paying more even if your habits don't change at all. Here's something many people don't think about. Milk doesn't have the luxury of time. It needs to be processed and delivered quickly, almost immediately after production. Because of that, any increase in cost gets passed straight to the final price, with no buffer to soften the impact. That's where the chain reaction begins. Once milk prices go up, everything connected to it follows. Cheese, butter, yogurt, even ice cream. It's not because these items are suddenly in short supply, but because the base cost behind them has increased. The tricky part is that you don't notice it right away. You keep shopping the same way, picking up the same products without thinking twice. By the time it clicks, the higher prices have already become your new normal. The pattern is easy to recognize. You walk into the store, grab exactly what you always do. Nothing extra, nothing different. But when you reach the checkout, something feels off. The total is higher. Not dramatically, but enough that, over time, it starts to add up in a meaningful way. One shopper put it simply, "I didn't buy anything extra, but my weekly bill kept going up." That's when I finally started paying attention to milk prices. This isn't the kind of increase that makes you stop buying right away. Your routine stays the same, but the amount of money you're able to keep each month slowly shrinks. Think about it. When was the last time your basket stayed the same, but your total went up anyway? You're not purchasing more, yet little by little, you're losing more money every single week. Number 9. Bread and wheat. A simple loaf of bread is supposed to cost just a few dollars, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that the price is shifting faster than it seems. What really matters here isn't just that it's getting more expensive, it's that such a basic item depends on a surprisingly complex chain of factors. Recently, wheat-based products have gone up by roughly 6% to 12%, and this category is heavily influenced by everything happening behind the scenes. Unlike many other foods, bread doesn't exist on its own. It sits right at the center of a larger system, where even a small change can ripple outward and affect everything connected to it. So why does this happen? To make a loaf of bread, you need wheat, but growing wheat requires fertilizer, and producing fertilizer depends heavily on energy. From there, you also have fuel for transportation, facilities to mill the flour, and distribution networks to get the final product onto store shelves. You don't see all these layers when you pick up a loaf of bread, but you're paying for every single one of them. Here's something most people aren't aware of. There have been times when fertilizer prices jumped by more than 30% in just a few months. When that happens, the cost of growing wheat rises almost instantly. There's no announcement or warning. It simply gets absorbed into the final price. In many cases, the price of bread isn't driven directly by wheat itself, but by the cost of the fertilizer used to grow it. And by the time you notice, the change has already taken effect. You continue buying bread like you always have, but now you find yourself actually checking the price. It's still a small loaf, but the cost no longer feels small. When everyday essentials like this start to shift, it's no longer just about one product. So think about it. When was the last time you really paid attention to the price of a loaf of bread? Number 8. Chicken and low-cost protein. Most people assume there's always a cheaper alternative, but when everyone rushes to that same option, it doesn't stay affordable for long. When beef prices climb quickly, shoppers tend to react right away by switching over to chicken. And when a large number of people make that same move, demand spikes almost immediately. In certain periods, chicken prices can jump by 5% to 10% in just a matter of weeks. This doesn't necessarily happen because there's a shortage, but because too many people are choosing it all at once. The cause isn't just consumer behavior, it's also tied to production costs. Raising poultry relies heavily on industrial feed like corn and soybeans. And here's something many people don't realize. Feed alone can make up more than 60% of the total cost of raising chickens. So, when corn prices go up, it becomes nearly impossible for chicken prices to stay the same. You don't see these shifts happening in real time, but you definitely feel the impact. You switch to chicken thinking it will help you save money, but you're not the only one making that decision. And that's when the dynamic starts to change. One person shared, "I moved to chicken because beef got too expensive, but just a few weeks later, I noticed chicken prices had gone up too." It's not because chicken suddenly became scarce. It's because too many people were looking for the same alternative at the same time. Chickens today can reach market weight in just a few weeks, much faster than in the past. Yet even with that speed, the system can't fully absorb a sudden surge in demand. Before long, you find yourself right back where you started, only now with a different product at a higher price. You're not really discovering a cheaper option. You're simply following the crowd. And when everyone moves in the same direction, prices almost always rise. Think about it. Have you ever switched to something more affordable, only to watch its price increase soon after? Number 7. Canned foods. You probably see canned goods as one of the safest options in the store. They last a long time, don't need special storage, and have always been considered a budget-friendly choice. But lately, if you pay close attention, you'll notice that the prices of canned items are shifting in ways that aren't immediately obvious. What's interesting is that these products aren't getting more expensive because of what's inside them. The real cost increase is coming from what you don't see. Metal packaging, manufacturing, and transportation expenses are all going up. As the price of metal rises, each individual can become more costly to produce. And when that happens across millions of units, those added costs don't just disappear. They show up on store shelves. In many cases, it's not the food that's getting expensive, it's the container holding it. There's also an important factor that often goes unnoticed. Global tensions and conflicts are directly impacting the supply of metals. Steel and aluminum, which are essential for making cans, both rely heavily on energy and international supply chains. When disruptions occur, energy prices increase, transportation becomes more difficult, and supply starts to tighten. You won't see those global issues while walking through a grocery aisle, but you'll feel their effects in the price of every can you pick up. Another key detail is how energy-intensive it is to produce metal cans. When energy costs rise, which tends to happen during uncertain times, packaging expenses go up almost immediately. And unlike some industries, canned food producers can't easily avoid these increases. Canned goods don't suddenly vanish from shelves overnight. Everything still looks fully stocked, but behind the scenes, the system is under pressure. As costs continue to climb, producers are forced to raise prices. And when that happens, items that were once seen as cheap, reliable storage options begin to feel different. A can of food might still be well within its expiration date, but it can still be affected by factors as simple as how it's stored. For example, being placed directly on concrete can damage it. You walk into the store, and at first glance nothing seems to have changed. But this time you take a closer look. Cans of soup, beans, or fish are all still there, just like before. The difference is in the price. They're no longer what you remember. What used to feel like an easy, no-thought purchase for long-term storage is here becoming something you have to consider more carefully. And when even your backup, shelf-stable foods start to shift, it's no longer a minor change. So ask yourself, do you still grab canned food without checking the price the way you used to? Number 6. Bottled water and juice. You're not going to walk into a store and find water missing from the shelves. It's still there, fully stocked, neatly lined up, looking exactly the same as always. But if you pay close attention, you'll notice the price is shifting in a way that's easy to overlook. This isn't really about water itself, it's about everything happening behind it. The cost of bottled water and juice is closely tied to plastic and transportation. And plastic, at its core, is made from oil. So when oil prices go up, the cost of producing plastic bottles rises right along with it. Add in higher transportation costs, and suddenly every case of water becomes more expensive to get from the source to your local store. You're not buying oil directly, but you're still paying for it every time you pick up a bottle of water. Here's something many people don't realize. Bottled water typically has very low profit margins, but relatively high transportation costs. That means even a small increase in fuel prices can force retailers to adjust prices quickly. There's no shortage of water itself. But the system that delivers it is under growing pressure. When oil prices rise, plastic becomes more expensive. When plastic costs go up, packaging follows. And when transportation costs increase, the final price you pay rises too. There's no step in this chain that can easily absorb the extra cost. At first, you probably won't notice any difference. You shop the same way each week, and everything feels normal. But after a month or so, when you take a closer look, it becomes clear. You're paying more for the exact same amount of water. Some price increases don't happen fast enough to trigger an immediate reaction. But because they're slow and consistent, they tend to keep going and rarely reverse. Think about it. When was the last time you saw water priced the way it used to be? Number 5. Fresh vegetables. Fresh vegetables might feel like the category you understand best, but in truth, it's one of the most unpredictable. Unlike milk or water, vegetable prices don't move steadily or gradually. They fluctuate week to week, and sometimes even day to day. A single period of bad weather can send the cost of certain vegetables up 20% to 50% almost overnight. And the reasons are out of your control: weather and transportation. Heavy rain, drought, or unusual temperatures can instantly reduce supply. Because fresh vegetables spoil quickly, there's little time for the system to adjust. Here's a detail many people overlook. Fresh produce has an extremely short life cycle. From harvest to the moment you buy it, the window is very narrow. If supply is disrupted, prices respond almost immediately. You don't have to wait long to see it in action. Last week, prices felt normal. This week, the same vegetables cost noticeably more. No warning, no early signs. You still buy vegetables, but now you're never quite sure what you'll pay next time. This is the category where there's no time to prepare. By the moment you notice the increase, it has already happened. Have you ever walked into a store and been surprised by the price of vegetables that week? Number 4. Fruit. You might think of fruit as just the sweeter version of vegetables, but in reality it's far more unstable. Not because it spoils easily, but because it relies on factors you cannot control, and those factors are changing fast. Fruit prices don't rise gradually. They don't creep up slowly like milk or water, giving you time to adjust. Sometimes certain fruits can jump 20% to 60% within just a few weeks, and usually you only notice after the change has already happened. The two main drivers are seasonality and transportation. Fruit depends entirely on the weather. Frost, drought, or unusually long rainfall can immediately cut supply. Unlike many other foods, fruit can't be stored long-term. There's no buffer, no system to smooth out disruptions. When production drops, supply drops instantly. Another overlooked detail: most fruit doesn't come from nearby. It travels hundreds, even thousands of miles before reaching your local store. That means even small increases in transportation costs or minor supply chain hiccups can cause prices to jump almost immediately. There's no delay, no cushion. You don't see that long journey, but you're paying for it every time you buy a piece of fruit. And when supply dips, prices don't rise gradually, they spike. A fruit may be fully stocked today, but a few days later, it might be completely gone. I remember going to buy the same fruit I always bought every week, but that week, it wasn't there. Not because it was expensive and not because I didn't want it. It had just disappeared completely. A few days later, it returned to the shelves. Same type, same look. But the price had changed, and the feeling was different. That's when you start to realize something. You don't control the price of these items, you only respond to it. You still buy fruit, but you can't predict how much you'll pay next time. And that's the real problem. Some things don't disappear gradually. They vanish first, then come back at a price that makes you pause. When you start noticing the cost of items that used to feel normal, the system has already shifted. Have you ever gone back to the store and couldn't find what you bought just last week? Number 3. Candy and chocolate. You might overlook this category or assume it doesn't really matter, but it's actually one of the first areas where changes become noticeable, sometimes even before essentials. Candy and chocolate aren't necessary for survival, yet they respond very quickly to shifts in raw material costs. Recently, cocoa prices have surged at times by 30% to 40%, impacting the entire chocolate industry. And it's not just about consumer demand, it's largely about supply. Cocoa only grows in specific regions of the world. When weather conditions worsen, yields drop, or supply chains face disruptions, availability tightens almost immediately. When that happens, prices inevitably rise. But here's the interesting part. You don't always see the increase on the shelf right away. Manufacturers often have another approach. They keep the sticker price the same, but reduce the size of the product. And because the packaging looks familiar, you don't realize you're actually paying more until you pick it up. The chocolate bar seems unchanged at first glance. Same wrapper, same price, nothing looks different. But the moment you lift it, something feels off. Not because you're actively searching for a difference, but because the change is noticeable enough to catch your attention. I remember picking up a chocolate bar I'd bought dozens of times before. My first thought wasn't about the cost. It was, why does this feel lighter? That's when you start to understand that price isn't always displayed in numbers. You still buy the chocolate, but now you begin to pay closer attention. You compare sizes and start realizing that for the same amount of money, you're getting less. Nothing has disappeared. It's all still on the shelves. But the product itself has subtly changed. By the time you notice, you've already gotten used to receiving less for the same price. You're not being charged more explicitly. You're just getting less without being told. So ask yourself, do you still believe prices aren't rising just because the amount you pay hasn't changed? Number 2. Sugar. You might not buy much sugar, and it might not feel important, but sugar quietly shows up in almost everything you consume. Its price increases don't make headlines or grab your attention like meat or vegetables do. Still, recently, sugar prices have risen about 5% to 7%, and the critical point is that sugar rarely moves on its own. It moves with the system. The reasons are in production and transportation costs. Sugar depends on agriculture, weather conditions, energy for processing, and distribution networks. When fuel costs climb or production expenses rise, sugar prices follow, not in sudden jumps, but steadily over time. Here's something many people overlook. Sugar isn't just the bag you buy. It's hidden in baked goods, soft drinks, sauces, packaged foods, basically in things you eat or drink every day without noticing. Even if you rarely purchase sugar directly, you're paying for it constantly. And this is where the danger lies. When sugar prices rise, the effect doesn't stop at one item. Candy goes up, beverages go up, processed foods go up. It doesn't appear as one big spike. You see many small increases happening across multiple products at once. You don't notice it directly when you walk into the store, but over time, it becomes clear. Your total bill is climbing in multiple places. I didn't buy anything extra, yet my spending kept creeping higher. That's how sugar works, quietly, subtly, and always present. You still drink coffee, eat sweets, and buy familiar items. But you rarely realize that part of the cost inside them is slowly increasing. It's invisible, yet you're paying for it constantly. And because you don't notice it, there's no way to avoid it. Have you ever stopped to consider how much of your bill comes from something you never even think about? Number 1. Dry foods. You might assume this category is the most stable. Rice, pasta, dried beans. These items are always on the shelves, always stocked, always available. And most of the time, that's true. But that very reliability makes dry foods one of the most vulnerable categories when disruption hits. Under normal conditions, prices for these staples rarely fluctuate. But when instability strikes, war, crisis, supply chain interruptions, or sudden shifts in consumer behavior, the system comes under immediate pressure. The problem isn't that production falls short, it's that demand can spike faster than supply can respond. As soon as signs of instability appear, people don't wait. They buy early, stock up, and panic spreads. When millions do this at once, shelves that seemed full today can be empty tomorrow. Here's a key detail many people overlook. The food distribution system relies on a continuous flow, not massive reserves. Full shelves don't mean warehouses are overflowing. They simply mean products are arriving just in time. And when that flow is disrupted or overwhelmed by sudden demand, everything changes almost instantly. Today, the store looks normal, shelves are stocked, nothing seems wrong. But once a wave of buying hits, the next day can look completely different. I've seen this happen in real life, not in a movie. One day, everything was fully stocked. The next, shelves started to empty. Within just a few days, the most basic items were gone. Not because they were rare, but because everyone wanted them at the same time. You walk into the store not looking for luxury items, but for essentials. And those essentials are exactly the things that disappear first. Not due to scarcity, but because universal demand hits all at once. By the time you realize it, you're no longer shopping the same way. You're trying to catch up. Will you notice early or only once the shelves start to empty? Every item on this list is familiar, ordinary, and not the kind of thing you'd expect to become a problem first. But the issue isn't each item alone. It's that all of them are changing at the same time. You aren't buying more, and your habits haven't changed. Yet the money you keep each month is slowly shrinking. And most people don't realize it immediately. There's no warning, no single moment where you can say, this is when it started. It happens gradually, until one day you look back and realize everything has shifted. Among these items, where have you noticed the biggest change? Have you started adjusting your shopping habits, or are you still doing the same as before? Because when the system doesn't just get more expensive, but begins to break, things won't change slowly anymore. They can disappear in just a few hours. In the next video, I'll show 12 foods that vanish from stores within the first 6 hours of a power outage, and why the most familiar items are the ones that disappear fastest. What do you think will vanish first?